All right, we've been moving onward. Onward as we reopen, onward as we prepare for a huge Christmas season, and onward into 2022. There's got a lot of changes for this church with Kevin arriving and all the different hopes that we have for that year. And we've been looking at this story of Joshua to see what guidance, what wisdom, what encouragement that is relevant. And as I said before, we're going to look at three key aspects of Joshua's life. And let's remember the story so far. I'm going to see how quickly I can do this. I'm going to go right back to to Abraham. And Abraham, when he was told to leave Ur and go because God was going to give him and his descendants this promised land. And so Abraham arrived in this promised land, but he and his descendants only lived there for 4 generations when Joseph took the people down to Egypt and into slavery. And, well, he didn't take them into slavery, they ended up in slavery. And they were down there for 400 years when God heard the cries of the people and said, I will rescue you, I will bring you back to the promised land. And so that's where Moses jumps into the story, and the Exodus through the Red Sea, down to Mount Sinai. They meet God, everything's going great. They come up the other side, and they're getting ready to enter into the promised land fairly quickly in the story. And if you look in Numbers 13, Moses sends some spies in, one who happens to be a very young Joshua. And they come back and they say, it's amazing, this land, but there are some really big, scary people in there as well. And if you know the story, because of doubts and disobedience, they decided, no, I don't think God's going to help us do this. And so they went back into the desert and got stuck there for another 40 years. And that's where we picked up the story last week when Joshua gets called into leadership. They come back to the edge of the promised land yet again. And in a similar way, did you notice that Joshua also sends spies into the land? Very similar to what Moses did, 39 years earlier. And this time, the spies come back, and that's actually where they met Rahab, who we heard in our Bible reading today. Rahab helps them out. And this time when they come back, Joshua, calls them to be strong and courageous, as we heard last week, that God was going to help them do this. And so in chapters 3 and 4, in a bit of a nod back to the Exodus itself, they literally crossed the Jordan River by the parting of the Jordan River, and they walk through on dry land. Very similar to the Exodus. And when they get to the other side, they're in the promised land now. And so they have a Passover meal there. They celebrate the fact that they're there. Everything seems to be going really well until they walk around the corner and suddenly they're confronted with this wall. Oh, I forgot the bit about the story of a person turning up, an angelic person turning up. I'll come back to that later. But they walk around the corner and there is this massive wall. And it's a bit like going, oh my, everything was going so well. We parted the Jordan, we walked through, we celebrated Passover in the promised land. Everything's going so great. And now they're confronted on the horizon with this massive wall. You can almost imagine them pulling up, the cartoon style, pulling up and going, what do we do now? What do we do now? We're supposed to be moving onward and into the promised land. And now we're confronted by this. Jericho was a strategic, well-protected military outpost. If they were going to move onward, they had to deal with the wall in front of them. Now, we're supposed to be relating this back to ourselves in this idea of reopening, this idea of moving into a busy Christmas season, into 2022. What are some of the walls that we might be seeing on our horizon? What are some of the things that are pulling us up at the moment and going, whoa, if we're going to move onward, we might have to talk about that, or we might have to deal with that wall in front of us? What are the things on the horizon that you might be even wondering, I don't even know how I'm going to move past that? What are the hurdles that might might make it hard to be moving onwards with confidence. I actually am interested in your answers. So if you're watching online, could you write some in the comments section? What are the walls? If you're in the building, you know the password now, don't you? Capital R, Romans 8:28. That's the Wi-Fi password. Grab on, write it in the comment section. I'm going to give you two answers that I think, my own personal answers of walls I can see. But what are the walls that you can see on the horizon, either for you as individuals or us as a church, that we're going to have to either talk about or address moving onwards? One of the walls that I think I'm facing as I emerge out of lockdown is exhaustion. I don't know who's with me on that one. I'm just tired. It's been a journey to get to this point, not only physically but emotionally, and I'm drained. And now I'm looking at a busy Christmas season and a big year next year, and I'm sort of going, that's a wall that I'm going to have to try and work through what that means. I think it's not only me, because I can see it reflected in trying to repopulate the rosters coming out of lockdown. Some people are a little bit tired. Trying to find leaders for Christmas programs. We're hopeful that we're going to pack them all up, but you know, I also imagine some people might just go, oh, I'm just tired this year. What does it mean for us to address that wall? Another wall that I know the Church Council has been trying to work through and looking into next year is the issue that we only have one manse as a church here. And from next year, we're going to have two ministers. How do we solve that one? It's not as if we can go out and buy a manse, not around here. That's just beyond us. And so we need to find a manse to rent for Kevin and the family to live in. And we set up a small team to be looking at that. And I've got to say, that's a harder thing to do than to say, because the market at the moment is nuts. And so trying to find an appropriate family for Kevin and his family in this time, well, certainly at times that journey has felt like it's been an insurmountable wall. So what about you? Has anybody written anything in the comment section yet? Not that I can see, but maybe my thing just hasn't updated yet. Keep going, keep writing. I'm going to refer back to them in a moment. But I actually had a chat with Kevin during last week and recorded some of his answers of what he was feeling at the moment as well. And I'm confident that this week this will work. So I'm going to have a look at Kevin as 3 minutes with Kevin. See if this works.
Well, of course, COVID has been a great disruption for us and for any church community, anybody, and not having that physical sense of community, that has been quite challenging. That I think Christian worship, Christian gathering always has that sense of togetherness, sense of belonging, connectedness, that tangible sense. It has been quite a barriers. And how to be missional, how to do a mission in a time of pandemic has been and will be a continuing challenge for us. Well, as I mentioned briefly, how to do a church in a time of new normal, time of continuing pandemic, I think that will continue to challenge us to shift the perspective on being a church. And you, Turramurra, seems to be well prepared now, have good resources, prepared a lot for that transition, and I'm grateful that church takes a courage to face those challenges. Jericho, this city is a place of decision. Joshua decided to trust in God and decided to follow God's instruction in Jericho. In Jericho, the blind man Bartimaeus decided to call out Jesus for help while others tried to silence him. And of course, I don't find it easy to trust in God, but we have those stories. I have experienced God who provides and God who will make a way for us. I play a few instruments. I love to be a band, but my wife, she's a lot more musical than I. She's actually a professional musician. She's a trained pianist. And as my kids have pianist mother, they are learning piano. And actually, Annabelle, my daughter, she achieved the fourth grade in AMEB piano, which is I know it's very high for her age. And I wish I could learn piano from Ine one day.
Gee, I'm glad that worked this week. Very good, very good. So back to the story. So Joshua and the Israelites have come around the corner and they are confronted by a wall that they have to address. They have to somehow work out how to move beyond this looming wall of Jericho. And so I asked, what are some of the walls that we are facing as individuals in the church? I've got a few comments on here: unexpected health issues. Is there anybody want to yell out anything? What is the walls that we are facing here as a church or as individuals? We've got to get used to this interacting again. We'll get there. Yes. Sleep deprivation. Yes. Anyone else? Yes. Some key members are moving on. We're going to be acknowledging that out on the 21st. That is a hurdle. Returning to the office. Yep. Sorry, I shouldn't stand at the front here. I can't hear a thing. Constantly changing guidelines, yes. As we're still trying to work out whether we can actually sing next week or not, yes. 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 So not only do we have change, that change is uncertain. It's very unexpected, yes. Yes, the border issue. So for people like us who have been trying to go to Queensland for 18 months to visit Marin's sister, yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky. And so, whether they're individual or whether it's as a church, we've got these looming walls that are before us that we have to try and work out how we move past. I'm going to come to that, but I have to talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room. There is a very difficult part of the Bible reading we had today that sometimes I just wouldn't include in the Bible reading. I'll just leave it out because it's so hard. But let's talk about it just for a few moments. What is going on with that Bible reading? Why is God declaring war on the Canaanites? Is it okay to drive people from their land, from their homes, just because you want their land? That you say it's yours just because you lived in it for 100 years, 400 years earlier? And how do we understand those two very difficult verses where the wall collapsed, everyone charged straight in, they took the city, they destroyed everything with the sword, every living thing, men, women, young, old, cattle, sheep and donkeys. Oh my, that is a difficult verse, isn't it? And if you're hoping that I'm going to give you a nice, neat answer that sums up everything beautifully, that sits comfortably, I can't. I literally cannot give you a good answer. There is some half answers that I can share. So, for example, some commentators want to talk about the fact that killing and war in the Old Testament is hard. It is really hard. It's complicated, and it seems to go against the love and the peace and the inclusion that we read in the other parts of the Bible. And it's very difficult to hold those two things together. We might argue that, but God promised the Israelites this land. And God did through Abraham. It was literally the promised land. But does that make it okay to kick other people out? Not sure. Some theologians argue that the Canaanites were not good people at all, that they lived very evil lives. And there's evidence of that. Leviticus 18 or Deuteronomy 12 sort of highlights how bad the Canaanites were. So in a sense, some people will say this war, this kicking them out, is God's judgment on them. Maybe, but I don't think any of us are perfect, so how come they get, more punished than the Israelites? There is some evidence that Jericho wasn't actually a city of citizens as such. It didn't have normal living, normal people going about their normal lives, but rather it was a military outpost, and so the war was actually against soldiers rather than people. But as one person said, is killing a soldier better? One death is still troublesome, And so, as I said, none of these are great. One of the things that a lot of theologians and commentators and historians agree on is that a lot of the war talk in the Bible is hyperbole, not literal. So when they say they went in and killed every living thing, man, woman, child, right down to the donkeys, it's not a literal statement. It's a hyperbole. It's like if we were saying that Australia annihilated the West Indies last night in the cricket. Well, they didn't annihilate them. They're still living, but we use that sort of language to talk about sport. And people say that in the Bible, the writers of the Bible use that same hyperbole type language to talk about battles as either a way of boasting or showing off, or as a way of trying to look bigger than they are. And so, maybe it wasn't they killed everything and burnt the city to the ground, but they didn't win the battle, and they probably did kill some people. So it's still troublesome. It doesn't take away the problem. I wish there was an easy way that I could hold all this together. It's not, but this is the messy parts of our faith, isn't it? This is the parts where we have to read parts of the Bible and go, how do I sit with this? How do I wrestle with this? What is God trying to say to me through this passage? I've talked about the elephant in the room. I didn't solve it. I just talked about it. Shall I move on? We can talk about it afterwards. I just want to finish with a couple of really key gems out of this passage that I got to see what God might say to us. The first is actually not in the passage. It's actually in the few verses before the passage for today, where Joshua meets this angelic type figure. The verse actually says, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies?" We find out that he's actually the commander of the Lord's army who's speaking with Joshua. And so Joshua says, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies?" What's the angel of the Lord going to say? Come on, yell it out, yell it out. He's for us. Actually, no, the angel doesn't say that. Who knows this passage? The angel says, "I am for neither." What an interesting response. I am for neither, but as the commander of the Lord's army, I've come. What is the angel trying to say here? Joshua's going, great, look, we've got this angelic warrior here. Are you for us? And he goes, no. Right up front, the angel's trying to show Joshua, this is not Joshua's battle to fight. I'm not here for you because you're not the one who's going to bring the walls down. I'm not here to work for you because it's actually God I've come to work for. It's God's side I'm on. You're not going to bring the walls down. God is. That's why I'm here for the Lord. Interesting statements, aren't these? It's simple but profound. It's not Joshua's battle to bring down the walls. Joshua and the people are participants in the narrative, but the angel has not come to help Joshua. He has come to help God because it's God who brings down the walls. Why have I repeated all that? Because I think we need to get that. In the walls that we are facing, and when we see these walls looming in front of us on the horizon, sure, we're part of the solution. We are part of the narrative. We can't just put up our feet and say, oh, great, God's going to look after this. But we also need to realize that it is not our strength that's going to bring down the walls. It is not our own talents or endeavors or whatever that's going to bring down the walls. It's actually God working with us relying on God's strength that's going to bring down those walls. And that's reflected in the Bible reading that we had today. The instructions. What was the instructions to the people? Guess what you're going to do? Well, you're going to follow the ark, who's following the priest blowing the trumpet. And you're going to, march around the outside, not saying anything, just march. It's a symbolic way of saying, look, you guys aren't actually doing this. You're part of the story, yes, but you're not actually the ones doing the action. Leave that one to me, God says. Simply follow the way of the Lord. One commentator suggested this silent worship was an invitation for the people of Jericho to return to God. It was their opportunity to respond to God. Maybe. Or maybe it was just perfectly clear, that afterwards they could not claim any credit in bringing down the walls, the Israelites, because they literally just followed an ark. They walked behind the ark. It's interesting that if you go on to chapter 7, the story after this one, they have another battle with a city called Ai, and they don't listen to God. They try and do it in their own strength, and they get beaten. And it's almost like going, learn the lesson. Learn the lesson. Don't do it in your own strength. Rely on God. We need to lean into God's strength rather than to rely on our own. Anyway, back to the story of Jericho. They are silently following the ark for 6 days. They reckon it might have taken at least an hour to walk around, maybe even 2 hours to walk around the city of Jericho following the ark. And so they've been doing this for 6 days, silently walking. They were told not to make a sound, silently walking behind an ark for 6 days. And on the 7th day, this worship broke into triumphant yelling and trumpeting, and the walls came down. Have you noticed that I keep calling part of their participation worship? I'm doing that in particular. Here we go. Because it's just not me. There's a number of commentators who want to suggest that what the God through the angel asked Joshua to do and the people to do was actually an act of worship. This marching around the city was an act of worship. When the Israelites first laid eyes on Jericho, this huge, overwhelming wall, that hope about moving onwards would have been fading fast. But God encourages them, don't worry, I'm with you, I'm on your side, let's do this, just follow the ark. Just follow the ark, silently follow the ark. And as they were marching on behind this ark for an hour, the next day, hour, next day, hour, particularly in the last day when they had to do it 7 times, there's a lot of just silent walking. And I don't know if you've had that experience when you're just silently walking along, that sometimes your brain slips into another gear. And you might get a worship stuck in your head. Have you ever done that? You're walking along and suddenly, we are marching in the light of God. Or any other song that sort of has the rhythm of what you're doing. Shout to the Lord, or the earth let us sing. And it's just silently going over and over in your head. But the more that happens, and the more that you walk, and the more you suddenly feel like you're sinking deeper into a time of worship. I know bushwalking does the same thing. You're suddenly in that moment, and you suddenly feel that sense of God's presence being around you. And this worship seems to be just enveloping you as these songs silently go. And I can sort of imagine them doing this as they marched around the wall. And you could almost see, glancing across to the person going, you're singing something. What are you singing? I can sing up with you. And this very quiet worship emerging. And I could imagine by the end of the 6 times around, on the 7th time around, they've given up being quiet anymore. That they're actually worshiping out loud by now. They're praising God because that's all they can do. They're not asked to do anything else except to follow the ark. And so in this act of worship, it crescends into this... Crescends? Is that the right word? I don't know, you get the idea of what I'm saying. It builds up to this point where they're just so in this moment that when the walls fall down, it's just, yes, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Why do I like this idea of worship? Because it's the walls that we look at, the walls that we're facing moving forward. Could leaning into worship be helpful with those two? And so, yes, I'm tired, but I had a great time worshipping over there for those first two songs. And maybe I need to do that more. And maybe that's where my energy can be coming from. Not from me going, I need to find more energy myself, but leaning into worship and going, I'm just going to worship. And through that, I may find what I need to get through. What about the difficult situation of finding Kevin and his family a house to rent amongst this crazy house situation we are in at the moment, housing market? Well, let me tell you, the answer's actually been, our prayers have been answered. During the week, it was actually last week, wasn't it? That Kevin and his family actually found a house and said, oh, this looks good. It's a house in the right place that they wanted to. They went to look at it. There was 30 other people also looking at it, but they put in their thing, and almost out of the blue, we got it. So yes, the church has got a man next year for Kevin and his family that they're really happy with. And I remember someone saying to me, well, that's an answer to prayer. And I was almost taken aback a bit and go, actually, really that is, because we were not sure how this was going to work. You know, the team had put so much work, already looked at so many houses, and then suddenly that wall fell down and we've done it. Kevin's got a place to move into. And so I'm wondering, as I invite the worship band to come back up now, I'm wondering whether as we start to lean into this time of communion, whether we can just have a moment where we worship, where we actually go, you know what, I don't know how this wall before me is going to fall down. I don't know how I'm going to move onwards past this. But what I can do, a bit like the Israelites, keep my eyes focused on the ark. Well, we don't have to look at the ark. Who do we look at? Jesus. Keep our eyes focused on Jesus. Let's just get into the rhythm of the marching, the rhythm of the walk. Maybe looking at the people around us and noticing they're getting into the rhythm of it as well. And have that sense of worship just descending and enveloping us as we worship, as we prepare for communion. So let's worship.